The Clone Wars were one of the largest galactic-scale conflicts in the history of the galaxy, involving vast numbers of soldiers and huge fleets of capital ships. While the conflict was perhaps best known for the clone troopers and battle droids that fought on the ground, the enormous warships that the Republic and CIS deployed in the conflict are also pretty iconic. But while there are many iconic separatist capital ships, each filling their own different niches, in the films and Star Wars The Clone Wars, the Republic seems to make use of a much smaller variety of ships. Most of the time, the Republic fleets we see on screen near exclusively consist of either Venator-class Star Destroyers or Acclamator-class assault ships, with the occasional smaller vessel thrown in for variety. But the Republic Navy had a whole bunch of lesser-known capital ship classes at its disposal during the Clone Wars, many of which are highly underrated. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at all of the Republic's smaller, less appreciated capital ships from Legends, the Corvettes, Frigates, and Cruisers of the Republic Navy.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
For roughly 14,000 years, the old Republic Navy served the galaxy with distinction, contending with Sith, Mandalorians, and all manner of other threats. But following the end of the New Sith Wars in 1000 BBY, the Navy was dissolved and its assets were divided between the Judicial Forces and the Planetary Security Forces. It wasn't until the start of the Clone Wars in 22 BBY that the Republic Navy was reformed, and when it was, it had to be rebuilt from the bottom up. It could appropriate existing fleet groups, personnel, and capital ships from the Judicial Forces, and it could rely on local fleets for support and reinforcements, but the core of the Navy had to be rebuilt from scratch according to a new, more modern doctrine. In a shift from pre-Rusan Reformation's Republic Navy doctrine, the new Republic Navy was built around fleets of massive, heavily armed capital ships rather than fast-moving light cruisers. The most infamous of these new vessels were the Star Destroyers, with the Venator-class in particular coming to symbolize the Clone Wars-era Republic Navy. But the Republic still maintained lots of smaller capital ship classes too, a rather eclectic mix of ships from a variety of manufacturers, most prominently Kuat Drive Yards and its subsidiary Rathana Heavy Engineering, as well as the Corellian Engineering Corporation, Rendili Star Drive, and the Demorian Manufacturing Corporation, among others. These smaller capital ships mainly served as support ships in larger fleet groups, and we'll be discussing all of them in this video. Before we do though, we need to briefly talk about capital ship classification. During the Clone Wars, the Anaxis War College system became the standard for classifying warships, and we're going to use it as our standard going forward. The Republic's smaller capital ships all fit into the four classes on this scale. Corvettes, which ranged from 100 to 200 meters in length, Frigates, which ranged from 200 to 400 meters in length, Cruisers, which ranged from 400 to 600 meters in length, and heavy cruisers, which ranged from 600 to 1000 meters in length. Occasionally, ships within one class's length range were considered part of another class due to things like firepower, overall mass, or starfighter carrying capacity, but for the most part, length was what determined a capital ship's place on the scale. As a final note, we're only going to be talking about combat-oriented capital ships today, not auxiliary vessels. That means no transports, freighters, medical frigates, and so on. Those might merit a video of their own sometime, so if you'd be interested in that, make sure you let us know. We're also only going to be discussing ships that were explicitly used by the Republic Navy proper, not just by loyalist planetary security forces or other Republic-aligned groups. Now, let's get into things, starting with the Corvettes. As we just discussed, Corvettes were the smallest class of capital ship according to the Anaxis War College system, and they were usually fast, maneuverable, and lightly armed. Corvettes were highly effective at dealing with fighters, freighters, and smaller ships, and though they could usually only provide light fire support against much larger vessels in a straight fight, they were often effective as blockade runners. In the Republic Navy, Corvettes often served as pickets, escorts, and system defense craft. The Republic made use of a number of different Corvette types during the Clone Wars, many of which were former diplomatic transports that had been hastily retrofitted with weapon batteries. One such vessel included the CSS-1 Corellian Star Shuttle. This ship was originally just a large passenger shuttle designed for use by ambassadors and other Republic dignitaries, but many ships of the class were converted into light corvettes for use in the judicial forces in the years before the Clone Wars. The CSS-1 was a product of the Corellian Engineering Corporation, as were many other Republic corvettes. It was 80 meters long, propelled by a bank of 3 powerful engines, and it boasted a Class 1.5 hyperdrive. The ship required a crew of 8, consisting of a captain, 2 co-pilots, 2 communications officers, and 3 engineers, and it could carry up to 900 metric tons of cargo, plus consumables for 3 years. Original model Corellian Star Shuttles could carry up to 200 passengers, and they contained a large meeting room for dignitaries to gather in, while judicial retrofitted CSS-1s were likely converted to carry troops instead. Both retrofitted and original CSS-1s featured heavy armor plating and powerful deflector shields, while retrofitted shuttles also boasted at least 2 light turbolaser batteries. The judicial forces deployed these modified CSS-1 Corellian Star Shuttles alongside Republic light assault cruisers, which were also heavily modified diplomatic ships. These vessels were based on the Consular-class cruiser, another Corellian Engineering Corporation product that we'll discuss in more depth later, and they featured an extra engine, added communications equipment, and turbolasers, among other modifications. Both of these judicial corvette classes were handed over to the Republic at the start of the Clone Wars, though they only saw very limited use. The judicials also made use of the CR-90 corvette, better known for its use by the Rebel Alliance, which was also a product of the Corellian Engineering Corporation. Measuring 150 meters in length, this iconic ship was best known for its incredible speed. Its 11 engines gave it a maximum acceleration of 2,100 Gs in open space and a maximum atmospheric speed of 950 km per hour, making it a highly effective blockade runner. The CR-90 also boasted a Class 2 hyperdrive. These corvettes had decently tough hulls and shields, and they were armed with 2 dual mount and 4 single mount light turbolasers. Depending on configuration, they were usually manned by crews of 30 to 165, with a minimum crew of 7 personnel, and they could carry up to 600 passengers and up to 3,000 tons of cargo. The CR-90 Corvette was a very popular starship model among private owners during the Clone Wars, but it was only used uncommonly by the judicial forces and the Republic Navy. When it did see use, it was usually as a blockade runner, troop transport, or light fleet escort. Another limited-use corvette was the Republic stealth ship, identified in canon as an IPV-2C stealth corvette. This ship was designed and manufactured by CNR Design Systems as part of a classified Republic military project, and it was one of only a few stealth ship classes to see use during the Clone Wars. This needle-shaped vessel was 99.71 meters long, and it was propelled by a set of 4 engines which were located in the ship's flared-out aft module. The stealth corvette had a maximum acceleration of 950 kilometers per hour, and it was also equipped with a hyperdrive. The ship required a crew of 12, consisting of 2 specially trained clone stealth pilots and 10 special operations troopers, the latter of whom included at least 2 gunners and 2 countermeasures officers. Most of the corvette's crew stations were located in a cockpit module at the front of the craft, and the corvette also had space for cargo and a number of passengers. The stealth corvette had 2 powerful sensor suites, strong shields, and it was also equipped with flares for use against tracking missiles, giving it considerable defensive capabilities. It was lightly armed, equipped only with 2 aft-mounted anti-starfighter dual laser cannon turrets for point defense and 4 proton torpedo launchers. But by far, the stealth corvette's most important attribute was its state-of-the-art cloaking device. This was a rare, stygium crystal-powered cloaking device that rendered the corvette completely invisible, both to sensors and the naked eye. Such devices were usually limited to large ships due to their size and power requirements, but the IPV-2C carried a miniaturized version of the standard Stygium cloak that had been specially designed by the engineers at CNR. The cloaking device itself was housed in the Corvette's bow, while the 28 octagonal cloak projectors studded the length of its midsection. The IPV-2C stealth corvette was designed during the first months of the Clone Wars, and it first saw action in the Battle of Christosis, in which the class prototype carried out a successful attack run on Admiral Trench's flagship, crippling the much larger Separatist Dreadnought. The extreme cost of cloaking devices prevented the Republic from commissioning many of these ships, so they were used very sparingly throughout the Clone Wars. They could be used as blockade runners or as attack craft for surprise precision strikes, although they were less useful for chaotic, large-scale naval battles. But by far the most well-known Republic Corvette class was the Consular-class cruiser, also known as the Republic Frigate, despite neither being a frigate nor a cruiser. This small, originally unarmed corvette was a symbol of Republic authority in the years before the Battle of Naboo, used as a consular ship and transport by Jedi Knights and Republic dignitaries. During the Clone Wars, however, the Consular received the Charger C-70 retrofit, which converted it into a light capital ship, allowing it to see action with the Republic Navy. The Consular-class cruiser was yet another product of the Corellian Engineering Corporation, and many ships of the class were assembled in the great orbital shipyards of Corellia itself. Many of these ships were made for the Judicial Forces and Republic Diplomatic Corps before being requisitioned by the Navy, while others were built specifically for the Navy during the Clone Wars. At 115 meters in length, the Consular was a compact but well-equipped ship, and the Clone Wars era variant of the vessel was suitable both for ship-to-ship combat and hosting high-stakes negotiations. For most of its length, the Consular was a narrow vessel with a small profile, though it widened out dramatically at its aft end. The aft quarter of the ship was mostly given over to the ship's propulsion and communication systems. The Consular's main reactor was located directly beneath its comms array at the forward end of the aft section, with fuel tanks to either side. Additional power cells and the fuel lines were located in a fan-shaped section between the reactor and the ship's 3 engines, which were connected by pairs of radiator panels. The vessel was propelled through space by a trio of Dyne 577 radial atomizers, which were located at the very back of the ship. These 3 thrusters were exceptionally powerful, giving the Consular a maximum atmospheric speed of 900 km per hour and a maximum acceleration of 2,040 Gs in outer space. Thanks to a comprehensive bank of maneuvering thrusters, 4 of which were located on the underside of the midsection and 2 of which were located at the fore of the Salon pod, the Consular was also very maneuverable. Of course, it was also equipped with a hyperdrive, a long Voltrans Triarch CD 3.2. Clone Wars era Consular-class cruisers had Class 1.5 hyperdrives, an improvement over the Class 2 hyperdrives the line was originally designed with. The aft section also featured the Consular-class's communications array. While original model ships of this class featured a collection of a dozen different kinds of antennae and dishes, many of these were removed to make way for weapon systems by the Charger C-70 retrofit. The ship's deflector shields were located along the Corvette's dorsal spine, just forward of the comms array. These projected fairly powerful shields, which gave the Consular surprising survivability for its size. The ship's sensors, meanwhile, were located at the bow of the vessel, with the main sensors located below the cockpit and an additional sensor dish mounted just off to the side. Much as with the communication systems, the Consular's sensor clusters were reduced in size by the retrofits, once again for the sake of added weaponry. The Consular-class cruiser had a crew of 8 organic personnel, consisting of the ship's captain, 2 co-pilots, a navigator, a communications officer, and 3 technicians. Some or all of these positions were filled by clone naval officers on some ships, while on others, they were filled by recruited Republic Navy personnel, largely former judicials. The technicians operated throughout the ship, while the remaining personnel all had stations on the command deck. This small crew was assisted by a large retinue of droids, however, most notably including R2 series astromechs. The number of droid personnel aboard the average Consular-class cruiser is unknown, but they played a vital role in maintaining the ship. Depending on configuration, Clone Wars era Consular cruisers could have quarters for 16 visiting dignitaries or 20 clone troopers. The Charger C-70 Consular was also configured to carry up to 6,000 metric tons of cargo, a significant increase in carrying capacity over the original model. The Consular's interior was accessed via a loading ramp on the underside of the midsection, or by a pair of docking rings at the junction of the aft and midsection. The interior of the Consular-class cruiser was divided into 4 decks, which were connected by 2 turbo lifts, one toward the aft, between the docking rings, and another at the back of the command deck, toward the fore. The bottom deck, located along the belly of the Corvette, was largely given over to cargo storage and maintenance areas, along with the ship's boarding ramp and the access chutes to the Corvette's 4 escape pods. These escape pods were located on the underside of the ship's midsection wings, mounted in clusters of 2 just behind the forward-leaning gear. These escape pods could seat 8 people each, and they were equipped with their own maneuvering thrusters and sensors. Original model Consulars only had 2 escape pods, but the increased troop carrying capacity of the Clone Wars era Corvette required the addition of the extra pods. The second lowest level of the ship was the main deck, the largest of the 4, which contained the docking ring entry vestibule, as well as part of what were formerly diplomatic suites. Some Clone Wars era Consular cruisers retained this deck's original lounge, formal dining room, and other diplomatic suites, while most had them replaced with additional cargo storage, a medical bay staffed with a 2-1B surgical droid, and other military facilities. At the forward end of this deck were the crew quarters and the droid hold, while the deck above, located in the upper part of the Corvette's midsection, contained state rooms for visiting dignitaries or barracks for clone troopers. The uppermost deck of the Corvette was the command deck, the smallest of the 4 from which the ship was operated. From back to front, this deck contained a turbo lift, the crew lounge, the communications station, the navigator station, and the cockpit, where the captain and both co-pilots were stationed. Below the cockpit, connected by airlock to the main deck, was a large, rounded salon pod. On original model Consulars, this part of the ship was meant for formal negotiations, and as such, it was heavily armored and insulated against eavesdropping or interference, with its own separate life support systems and power grid. Original model salon pods contained a single large stateroom that contained a hologram pad table and seating for 16 beings with a secure holo communications system. But salon pods were interchangeable, and Clone Wars era Consular cruisers could carry a variety of models, from the original diplomatic pods to boarding craft or a command center. All models of salon pod could be detached for use as large escape pods, and they had their own complete sensor arrays and life support systems, allowing them to serve as fully functional shuttlecraft for a few hours at a time. From the beginning, Consular-class cruisers featured respectably tough armor and especially strong shields, and the Charger C-70 retrofit outfitted them with surprisingly powerful weapons as well. The refitted Consular-class cruisers were armed with 5 twin turbo laser batteries for offensive purposes, as well as a single dual medium laser cannon for point defense. The point defense turret was located amidst the communications array and had a full 360 degrees of rotation, while 4 of the 5 twin turbo lasers were mounted in turrets along the sides of the midsection, 2 dorsal and 2 ventral, with broadside firing arcs. The last dual turbo laser was fixed and mounted atop of the cockpit. These weapons were fairly light, but they allowed the Consular-class to be effective as a close-range skirmisher and picket ship. The Consular-class cruiser was brought into Navy service very early in the Clone Wars, as Supreme Chancellor Palpatine ordered them to be converted into warships soon after the Battle of Geonosis. Subsequently, the Corellian Engineering Corporation devised the Charger C-70 retrofit, and before long, much of the Republic's diplomatic fleet had been converted into combat-capable corvettes, while new Consular-class cruisers were built expressly for combat purposes. Throughout the war, these corvettes saw use as pickets, blockade runners, armed transports, evacuation ships, support vessels, and minor escorts for larger Republic fleets. Consular-class cruisers saw action in naval battles above Christosis, Seleucami, and Selust, among other worlds. With that said, the Consular-class wasn't designed to be a warship, and its use by the Republic Navy was mostly out of desperation. After the first half of the war, combat use of the Consular declined, and by the end of the war, most ships of the class had been destroyed or decommissioned. Now it's time to talk about the real Republic frigates, which came in 3 classes. Although they were only slightly larger than corvettes and were still quite small by the standards of the Clone Wars, frigates generally filled different roles, and they were typically less maneuverable but more heavily armed than corvettes were. Frigates usually supported larger warships as part of combined fleets, destroying starfighters and smaller capitals while providing fire support against enemy cruisers. Frigates were often deployed in small groups to defend large vessels, supply convoys, or civilian vessels, or to pursue and destroy privateers. Some frigates were also outfitted for use as light command ships. The smallest frigate class in the Republic Navy was the Corellian Engineering Corporation DP-20 gunship, also known as the DP-20 frigate. The Corellian gunship, as it was often called, was commonly sold on the open market, though it was designed specifically for the use of the Republic Navy. Both private and military DP-20s operated as a tougher version of CEC's aforementioned CR-90 Corvette. At 120 meters in length, the DP-20 was technically a Corvette by length classification, but its firepower and armor meant that it functioned as a frigate in practice. The DP-20 had a very blocky, rough-looking design with a large rectangular engine block at the aft end, a cylindrical midsection with a central bulge, and a flattened conical fore. Nearly half of the frigate's interior was given over to its powerful reactor, its Class II hyperdrive, and propulsion systems, especially its main engines. These could propel the DP-20 at a maximum atmospheric speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour, and while this gunship wasn't terribly maneuverable, it was definitely fast. The cramped forward positions of the DP-20 were largely taken up by powerful shield generators and plenty of weaponry buried under layers of heavy armor plating. Its cramped interior had space for just 300 tons of cargo, 8 months of consumables, and no passengers. Typically, a crew of 101 personnel manned a DP-20 frigate, 45 crew and 46 gunners, although the ship could also operate on a minimum crew of just 10 people. The DP-20 frigate was armed with 8 dual turbo lasers, 6 quad laser cannons, and 4 concussion missile tubes. 2 of the dual turbo lasers were mounted on the front section and had forward firing arcs, while the remaining turbo lasers and quad lasers were located along the sides of the craft, with 3 turbo lasers and 3 quad lasers per side. Each concussion missile tube carried 30 heavy concussion missiles total. All told, the DP-20 was absurdly well armed for a ship of its size, earning its role as a frigate. The DP-20 frigate was explicitly built for the Republic Navy's use, and it served the Navy well throughout the Clone Wars. Primarily, it was used as an anti-starfighter picket for larger capital ships, although its firepower allowed it to take on other capital ships as well. Now, our first frigate-sized Republic frigate was the Kuat Drive Yard's Class C frigate, an enigmatic and little-seen class of starship. This ship measured 330 meters in length and had a highly unusual design, with an enormous blocky aft section and an extremely narrow forward section which several larger modules were suspended from. The ship was manned by a crew of 220, 200 crewmen and 20 officers, and it was sometimes converted into a hospital ship. Ordinarily though, the Class C served primarily as a stripped-down escort frigate. Nothing else about the ship is known, other than the fact that it was succeeded by the more recognizable Nebulan B escort frigate after the end of the Clone Wars. Lastly, we have the Centax-class heavy frigate, another fairly obscure ship that we don't have all that much information about. These ships were apparently built for the Republic by Sluisi shipwrights at the Sluis Van shipyards, which is a bit odd considering that Sluis Van was a separatist stronghold during the Clone Wars. The Centax-class heavy frigate was a very fast and maneuverable ship for its size, but in keeping with its profile as a frigate, it was also heavily armed. Centax frigates each boasted at least 10 laser cannons and 2 dual-launcher MG-1A proton torpedo batteries. Although small, Centax frigates could serve in a variety of roles, and they were sometimes chosen as flagships by Jedi officers. One such frigate, the Ranger, served as the Republic flagship in the Battle of Pre-Sitlin. Our next 2 Republic capital ships were technically frigates based on size classification, but they functioned as light cruisers and were classified as such. While many pieces of Star Wars media, including some of the films, use the term cruiser as a general term for any capital ship, true cruisers were medium-sized ships, usually averaging between 400 and 1,000 meters. Cruisers were usually very well-rounded, with a decent balance of firepower, defenses, speed, and maneuverability, and they could perform in a number of roles reasonably well, such as engaging other capital ships, providing cover for command ships, and fending off starfighter attacks. Within the Anaxis War College system, cruisers were divided into 2 categories: ordinary cruisers and heavy cruisers. The standard cruiser category also included light cruisers, although these were sometimes frigate-sized. These ships differed in size and firepower, but they generally shared the same role. During the Old Republic era, light and medium cruisers were the backbone of the Republic Navy, but during the Clone Wars, the Navy actually didn't use any medium cruisers at all, and its 2 classes of light cruiser were fairly small. These were the Carrack-class light cruiser and the Arquitens-class light cruiser. Let's start with the Carrack, the one you're less likely to have heard of. The Carrack-class light cruiser was a product of the Esselis-based Damorian Manufacturing Corporation, and it was intended to be deployed in groups as a cheap replacement for larger capital ships. The Carrack wasn't designed to operate as part of a full-fledged battle fleet, but in small groups, these light cruisers performed quite well in fleet engagements, and they were also excellent escorts for large command ships. The Carrack-class light cruiser was 350 meters long, and it had a long, blocky space frame with a bulbous forward section. The ship was cheaply built, but it was tough, and it was packed full of useful surprises. The blocky aft section of the Carrack-class light cruiser was dominated by the ship's power generators and ion reactor, and at its very aft end, the ship featured an array of 16 powerful ion engines. These could propel the Carrack through space at impressive speeds, making the ship faster and more maneuverable than some frigates. The ship had a top-of-the-line Class 1 hyperdrive, a comprehensive dorsal sensor suite, cruiser-strength shields, and a very durable hull laid with overlapping plates of armor. In fact, durability was the Carrack's speciality. On top of strong shields and thick armor, this beast of a light cruiser featured a heavily reinforced space frame and thick bulkheads, allowing the ship to endure a staggering amount of punishment. Even when a Carrack was crippled, it was designed to ensure maximum survivability for the ship's crew. The interior was compartmentalized, and each compartment featured independent life support systems, which meant that survivors were routinely found even aboard heavily damaged and completely disabled Carrack-class cruisers. This was especially important given that Carrack-class light cruisers required crews of 1,092 personnel to operate at a maximum efficiency. The ship could also carry 142 troops as passengers, plus 3,500 tons of cargo and a year's worth of consumables. The Carrack's interior was fairly cramped, and its design lacked a dedicated hangar bay. Despite this, the Carrack could carry 4 or 5 starfighters in external racks. But the Carrack's main offensive option was its impressive arsenal of weapons, which were what truly earned it the classification of light cruiser. The Carrack-class light cruiser was armed with 10 heavy turbo lasers, 20 point defense laser cannons or ion cannons, and 5 tractor beam projectors, spread fairly evenly across the ship's hull. The Carrack-class light cruiser was one of the Republic Navy's most reliable ship classes during the Clone Wars, especially during the conflict's later months. They were often paired with larger, heavy cruisers for use as fast attack escorts or assembled into small squadrons to bring down much larger vessels. Its firepower and durability allowed the Carrack to punch far above its weight class, making it a valuable asset for the Republic. Carrack-class light cruisers fought in the Battle of Prey-Sitlan and the Battle of Coruscant, among others. In the later battle, a squadron of 3 Carracks helped soften up the Separatist flagship Invisible Hand, allowing it to be crippled by the Star Destroyer Gualara. Then there was the Arquitens-class light cruiser, which was more well known than the Carrack but much less impressive. A product of Kuat Drive Yards, which also manufactured the Republic's largest capital ships, the Arquitens resembled many of KDY's more famous products, but it was smaller and more agile. These light cruisers most commonly functioned as fleet escorts, but they could also serve as agile command ships or pickets. As with many KDY capital ships, the Arquitens had a flat, arrowhead-shaped design with a small dorsal command tower and a bow that was divided into 2 short prongs by a narrow trench. Its aft section had an hourglass shape, while at the far aft end, the ship featured 3 exposed engine units linked by heat exchanger panels, similar to the Consular-class cruiser. The Arquitens-class light cruiser was 325 meters long, meaning that, like the Carrack, it was actually frigate-sized. However, its armor, shields, and firepower made it a light cruiser. The Arquitens was propelled by a trio of interlinked sublight thrusters, which could propel the Arquitens at fairly high speeds. The Arquitens wasn't only fast, but also very maneuverable for a light cruiser, able to fly in circles around larger capital ships, and it came with a Class II hyperdrive. The light cruiser's hull was very heavily armored, despite the small size of the Arquitens, and the ship's shields were fairly strong as well. While in canon, Imperial-era Arquitens-class cruisers are shown to have hangars, in Legends, the ship appears to have been hangarless and devoid of a fighter complement. The Arquitens featured 2 docking rings on either side of its widest point, which were the cruiser's main access points. The ship's interior quarters were small, but not cramped, particularly the bridge, which sat atop the cruiser's dorsal command tower. The Arquitens was manned by a rather small crew of just 100 personnel, and it could operate on a skeleton crew of just 20 personnel. The light cruiser could carry 100 clone troopers as passengers, and in canon, it could carry 1,200 tons of cargo and 3 months of consumables. The Arquitens was armed with 4 large heavy quad laser turrets, 2 dorsal and 2 ventral, as well as 4 dual turbo lasers and 4 missile tubes, which were located along the sides. This was a decent amount of firepower for a ship of the Arquitens' size, and it allowed it to engage larger vessels for short periods of time. The Republic Navy made extensive use of the Arquitens-class light cruiser throughout the Clone Wars, using it to flesh out fleet groups primarily composed of larger capital ships. The Arquitens notably made appearances in battles over Seleucami, Solust, Camino, and Cadavo, as well as many other worlds. From the early war to the Outer Rim sieges, the Arquitens was a staple of the Republic Navy, even if its capabilities weren't as impressive as the Carracks were. Moving on, the last 2 ships we're going to be talking about today are the Republic's heavy cruisers, the workhorses of the Republic Navy. For millennia, heavy cruisers were the largest and most powerful capital ships in the old Republic Navy, but during the Clone Wars, they were considered mid-sized ships like the smaller cruiser classes. The Republic, as well as the CIS and later the Galactic Empire, greatly favored heavy cruisers over light and medium cruisers, as they were the most reliable in full-scale naval battles given their usual toughness and firepower. The standards for heavy cruisers were more or less defined by the first of the Republic's 2 heavy cruiser classes, the Dreadnaught-class heavy cruiser. Manufactured by Rendili Star Drive, this class of capital ship had been around for almost a century before the Clone Wars, and while they might not have been the most recognizable to fans, they were one of the most iconic and ubiquitous capital ships in the galaxy. Dreadnoughts were very common in local sector fleets, and the judicial forces had maintained several of them prior to the war. Dreadnought heavy cruisers were designed for use in planetary blockades and large fleet battles, and they were highly effective in ship-to-ship combat. The design of the Dreadnought was loosely based on the Mandalorian Wars era Consular-class Dreadnought, although it more closely resembled the aforementioned Carrack-class light cruiser. The Dreadnought was 600 meters long and had a blocky, elongated design with a larger aft section and a rounded, clamshell-like fore. The aft end of the ship was largely taken up by the heavy cruiser's power core, reserve power generators, hyperdrive, and its array of 6 ion engines. By the time of the Clone Wars, all of these systems were outdated, at least on a stock Dreadnought. The cruiser's power generators were inefficient, and the hyperdrive was a sluggish Class 4, and the ion engines left the ship fairly slow and lacking for maneuverability. Some Dreadnought cruisers were upgraded with faster Class 2 hyperdrives, but they remained slow and ponderous in real space. But what the Dreadnought lacked in speed, it made up for in other systems. The heavy cruiser's 2 medium-range sensor transceivers were fairly powerful, and the Dreadnought was durable as hell, with a tough, heavily armored hull and decently powerful deflector shields, which were projected from generators housed in broadside blisters. The cruiser was equipped with numerous escape pods and particularly large cargo bays, which were located in the ventral parts of the fore and midsection. The main cargo hold was located in the lower midsection and featured a large forward docking port, while additional cargo space ran along the belly of the ship. The latter cargo area was fully or partially converted into a starfighter hangar on some Republic Navy dreadnoughts, giving these heavy cruisers a small air wing. Unmodified dreadnoughts could carry 9,000 tons of cargo and 2 years of consumables. Modified dreadnoughts could only carry a year of consumables, but they had a hangar space for a dozen starfighters, multiple shuttles, and small military walkers, much as ATPTs or ATRTs. Dreadnoughts could also carry 3,000 troops as passengers, either for defense against borders or deployment to planetary surfaces. This immense cargo space was necessary because of the Dreadnought's obscenely large crew. A fully crewed stock Dreadnought was manned by 16,210 personnel, consisting of 16,113 crew and 97 gunners. A Dreadnought could still run effectively on a smaller crew of 9,000, but that was still absurdly large for a ship of this size. To overcome this, the Republic developed slave circuit technology, which allowed many of the Dreadnought systems to be automated and interconnected with those of other Dreadnoughts in a fleet, greatly reducing crew requirements. Slave-rigged Dreadnoughts only required a crew of 2,204, making them much easier to staff. Slave circuit tech also improved the Dreadnought's computer systems, which were infamously prone to malfunctions. Dreadnought heavy cruisers' weapon mounts were highly modular, allowing for a variety of weapon configurations. The average Dreadnought was armed with 10 medium turbo lasers, 20 light quad turbo lasers, and 20 heavy laser cannons. The quad turbo lasers and laser cannons were usually arrayed along the sides, clustered in large blisters on the midsection, while the medium turbo lasers were divided evenly between the front and aft ends of the ship. Dreadnoughts were often modified with additional weaponry, such as point defense ion cannons and concussion missile launchers for defense against starfighters. Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers were a staple of the Republic Navy all throughout the Clone Wars, even after Rendili, and Rendili Star Drive with it, seceded and joined the CIS. Republic dreadnoughts were usually manned by recruited soldiers instead of clone naval officers, as clones were prioritized for the more important assault ships and star destroyers. Dreadnoughts rounded out many of the Republic Navy's fleet groups, and they were principally used for large fleet engagements. Dreadnoughts played key roles in a number of major battles, including the Battle of Rendili, the Battle of Duro, and the Battle of Coruscant, and they were heavily used by loyalist forces as well as the Navy itself. Finally, let's talk about the Republic Navy's second most iconic starship, the Acclamator-class transgalactic military assault ship. Designed and manufactured by Rothana Heavy Engineering, a secret subsidiary of Kuat Drive Yards, the Acclamator was the largest and most formidable heavy cruiser in the Republic Navy. It had the distinction of being the only capital ship that the Kaminoans commissioned as part of the Clone Army project, and the first ships of the class were designed and built in complete secrecy in Rothana's orbital shipyards. At the very start of the Clone Wars, the Acclamator was the main capital ship of the Republic Navy, the largest ship at the Republic's disposal. This role was quickly usurped by larger Star Destroyers, but these assault ships remained a valuable part of the Republic Navy throughout the war. They were primarily intended to carry armies to planetary systems or initiate orbital bombardments, but they could also serve as command ships or support vessels in fleet groups. They performed well in naval combat, serving effectively as heavy cruisers, and, as we've argued in the past, they were one of the most reliable and versatile ships in the Republic's arsenal. Like the smaller Arquitens-class light cruiser, the Acclamator had a flat arrowhead design with thick dorsal and ventral terraces toward the aft end, a square dorsal command tower, and a narrow aft fin between the ship's engines. This general shape was a common choice for Clone Wars-era Republic ships, since it allowed most of the ship's weapons to be brought to bear in full frontal assaults. The Acclamator was 752 meters long, 460 meters wide, and 183 meters tall in flight, making it the largest sub-Star Destroyer in the Republic Navy. The Acclamator's main power systems were located deep within the ship, along the vessel's spine, buried beneath the ship's outer decks and layers of armor plating for their protection. The assault ship's main reactor was located along the center line of the ship's aft section beneath the aft hull terraces in an open cavity that lacked artificial gravity. The main hypermatter annihilation reactor had an output of 200 sextillion watts, and it was supported by a pair of much smaller subsidiary reactors, which were located toward the front of the ship, one to either side of the reactant tanks. There were 6 or 7 of these, located in a line leading forward from the main reactor, each connected to the main reactor by channels that ran along either side of the fuel tank section. The Acclamator was propelled by a set of 4 engines located in pairs either side of the aft fin. 2 massive primary thrusters, which were longer and closer to the center, and 2 smaller secondary thrusters located further off axis to assist in turning the vessel. The engines featured electromagnetic thrust vectoring panels, making the Acclamator rather maneuverable for its size, and they could generate considerable speed, giving the ship a maximum acceleration of 3,500 Gs in open space and a maximum atmospheric speed of 1,200 km per hour. The Acclamator was also equipped with an extremely fast Class 0.6 hyperdrive, which had a 250,000 light-year range, allowing these assault ships to quickly cross the entire galaxy to deploy their armies. The hyperdrive was located in the Acclamator's tail fin, which also contained cooling systems and heat exchangers for the reactor, powerful repulsor lift generators, and the aft conduits for tensor and inertial compensator fields. The forward conduits of these fields ran through 2 small ridges along the top of the Acclamator's forward hull. Unlike most ships of its size, the Acclamator was designed to be able to land on and take off from planetary surfaces, and to that end, it featured powerful repulsor lifts and a set of 3 enormous landing legs to support its massive bulk. The ship was very tough, with a reinforced superstructure, powerful shields, and a heavily armored, super dispersive, neutronium-impregnated hull. The Acclamator required a shockingly small crew for such a massive ship, just 700 personnel, a mix of clone naval officers and recruited crew members. The interior decks where these personnel lived and worked were mostly concentrated in the dorsal half of the Acclamator, with most of the habitable decks being in or adjacent to the dorsal terrace. The ship also contained at least 15 such decks within the main portion of the ship, with many more in the conning tower. Crew quarters and stations were mostly located either within the dorsal conning tower or clustered around its base. This dorsal tower was thin and triangular, topped with a long, cylindrical and exposed bridge module, which contained the ship's main sensors and communication systems at its front end, as well as the Acclamator's bridge, war room, and other battle operations rooms. The bridge of the original Acclamator-class assault ship completely lacked windows, instead featuring sophisticated holographic displays along its walls, but later variants of the assault ship had more conventional Star Destroyer-style bridges with large bay windows. Most of the Acclamator's interior, however, was given over to enormous barracks and support sections for the assault ship's embarked troops. The main barracks areas were located along the sides of the ship, while other parts of the ship's interior contained assembly halls, armories, cargo storage, bulk transit shafts, and other facilities. In total, the Acclamator-class assault ship was designed to carry 16,000 clone troopers and support personnel, or roughly half a corps, and it also had 200,000 cubic meters of cargo space, or a cargo capacity of 11,250 tons. In addition, the Acclamator was designed to carry an enormous complement of vehicles, which were stored in 2 cavernous hangars. These hangar areas took up most of the Acclamator's ventral decks, and they both ran lengthwise to either side of the ship's reactor and fuel tank arrays, from the assault ship's aft end to roughly halfway through its midsection. Each of these enormous hangars carried half of the assault ship's vehicle complement, and the ship's troops were also staged and loaded onto gunships here. Each hangar contained 40 LAATs, a mix of LAAT gunships and LAAT dropships, for a total of 80 for the whole assault ship. These were stored and maintained together in a long, U-shaped ceiling rack where they could be boarded by pilots and troopers via boarding platforms. Service bays along the sides of each hangar stored the assault ship's heavy vehicles, typically 24 ATTE walkers and 18 SPHATs per hangar, for a total of 48 walkers and 36 artillery pieces, although these could be exchanged for other heavy vehicles. The assault ship's gunships were deployed via armored hatches in the floors of each hangar. When an LAAT was deployed, it would simply be dropped from its service rack through the hatch and out of the assault ship. In this manner, an Acclamator could rapidly deploy its first waves of clone troopers and ATTEs to a target planet. The rest of the assault ship's clones, ATTEs, and SPHATs would take a series of large service lifts to the smaller, lower hangar, which lay a level below the main hangars in the belly of the assault ship. This lower hangar was connected to both of the main hangars, and from there, ground forces would be deployed via a pair of enormous ramps, one to each side of the ship. These ramps were also how troops and vehicles boarded the Acclamator. Most Acclamator-class assault ships completely lacked starfighter hangars, although some, such as the Prosecutor, were modified to have a few along their sides, while others, like the Navuta B, were completely converted into starfighter carriers. The default Acclamator did have a small logistics hangar for visiting shuttles and cargo transfers, however. This hangar was located just forward of the dorsal terrace, above the reactor and fuel tanks, and it was accessed through a large, armored hatch in the assault ship's dorsal hull. Given that one of its intended combat roles was orbital bombardment, the Acclamator was pretty heavily armed. The ship's main weapons were 12 heavy quad-laser turbo turrets rated at 200 gigatons per shot. These were located in 4 clusters of 3 along the sides of the assault ship's dorsal and ventral terraces. The Acclamator was also armed with 24 laser cannons rated at 6 megatons per shot and an unspecified number of point defense laser cannons, both of which were primarily located in the assault ship's broadside trench. But the Acclamator's most powerful weapons were 4 heavy strategic missile launch tubes, which were clustered at the bow of the ship. These could fire huge, incredibly powerful ship-to-ship or orbital bombardment missiles. All of the Acclamator's weapons could be brought to bear in a full frontal assault due to the shape of the vessel's hull, allowing these assault ships to smash through blockades and unleash hell on a planet's surface. The Acclamator was primarily designed for planetary assaults, with the objective of either landing on a planet's surface to disgorge ground troops or obliterating key groundside targets with orbital strikes. A fleet of assault ships was also capable of carrying out a base Delta Zero bombardment, reducing a planet's entire upper crust to molten slag to destroy deeply entrenched enemy forces. However, the Acclamator also had plenty of utility in ship-to-ship combat. Its heavy weapons allowed it to pummel much larger warships into submission, making it a valuable part of many Republic fleet groups. Very early in the Clone Wars, Acclamator-class assault ships made up almost the entire Republic Navy. When the Republic took delivery of the Kaminoans' clone army, it also received dozens of assault ships that Rathana Heavy Engineering had built to go with it. After the Battle of Geonosis, the Republic commissioned 1,000 additional Acclamators, and in the first months of the war, these ships made up a large portion of the Republic Navy. At first, the Acclamator was the Navy's main capital ship, but after the first Star Destroyers hit the scene, it was relegated to more specialized roles. For the rest of the Clone Wars, Acclamators were mainly used for deploying large ground armies and carrying out orbital bombardments, or as supporting heavy cruisers in fleet engagements. The Acclamator saw use throughout the entire war, seeing action in key battles at Geonosis, Munilinst, Rendili, Ryloth, and Ring Govinda. On top of being widely used, it was also one of the Republic's most effective vessels of the Clone Wars. But we know what you're thinking. If the Acclamator is so good, why isn't there an Acclamator 2? Well, dear viewer, there was. The Acclamator-2 class assault ship was the variant of the original that entered use near the end of the Clone Wars. The Acclamator-2 was the same as its predecessor in most respects, but with a greatly reduced carrying capacity and greatly increased firepower. The Acclamator-2 could only carry 3,200 clone troopers, 16 LAAT gunships, 10 ATTEs, 8 SPH-ATs, and 64 speeder bikes. On the flip side, it had 24 heavy quad turbo lasers to the original Acclamator's 12, and its missile tubes were replaced with 2 larger, super heavy tubes with magazines of 100 heavy proton torpedoes. The Acclamator-2 could be used as a troop ship, like its predecessor, but its primary purpose was orbital bombardment, which it excelled at due to its improved firepower. So that's our look at the unsung heroes of the Republic Navy, the loyalist corvettes, frigates, and cruisers of the Clone Wars. But what do you think? Would you like to see a video on the Republic's Star Destroyers and larger vessels as well? Which of the ships we listed today is your favorite? Let us know all that and more in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.